All right, so for today, we're going to start by, that was unnecessarily loud. We're going to start by going over the exam, and then we'll push forward to some key things from 3.2. I will say I'm a little concerned about empty seats here in the room. I may have to stop giving general access to the live stream if we don't get more people back in the room. There's a direct correlation between high grades in the course and being in the room, and lower grades in the course and not being in the room. I mean, look, if you've got COVID, it is what it is. You have to do the best that you can, but it's important that you show up here in person physically if you want to succeed in the class. We're going to start by going over the answers to exam 1. I encourage you to take out your device and follow along. I have made your answers and the correct answers available on the exam. So as we go over these together, I encourage you to follow along and see which ones you got wrong. It's important when we have conversations like this, just like any of the homework exercises, the point here is for you to see why you got the ones right that you did, and probably more importantly, for the ones that you got wrong, you need to see how you got them wrong. Just writing down the correct answer doesn't do much for you. You need to learn the principle that you misapplied or didn't apply, or the thing that you recognize how you mistranslated it, so that you don't do it again on exams 3 and 4. All right. Can we all see that? Trying to make it bigger. It's not a touch screen. Huh, all right. All right, so question 1 here. What does it mean to say that an argument is deductively valid? This was right off the review sheet. The review sheet had the question, what does it mean to say that an argument is deductively sound? And I told you that, we could also do this with validity. Yes? Go to Grade Center and click on your grade. And I think that will do it. Try going, did you go to test and click on the test through the corner menu? Yeah, click begin.
What I did is I went to my grade and click on it, it's 1, click that, and then you go to the right where it says your grade.
Okay, good. Yeah, what he said. All right. So what does it mean to say that an argument is deductively valid? Well, it means if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Again, I told you to expect this kind of question. Arguments. Argument was one of the other foundational terms from chapter 1 we discussed early on in the first week. And we talked about the evaluative terms for arguments are sound or unsound, valid or invalid. So A is the correct answer. Remember, we don't use true or false for arguments because true or false is a more precise evaluative term. You apply that to specific claims in an argument, not the argument itself. A premise or conclusion in an argument can be true or false, not the argument itself. Which of these is not a well-formed formulae? You'll remember there are exactly 8 acceptable well-formed formulae in Aristotelian logic, and the most common pattern that students want to do that is not a well-formed formulae is this one. All A is not B. That should probably be just no A is B. Proper way to translate: the tallest person in Virginia. You'll remember one of the rules of translation is for all superlatives. There can be only one by definition, And when we are only talking about one specific thing, as with a superlative, we need a lowercase. So lowercase t is acceptable. True or false, all arguments that have all true premises and a true conclusion are sound. That, of course, is false. We discussed this during the review. You can have an argument with all true premises and a true conclusion that does not mesh together to form a coherent argument. So I can have true premises that have nothing to do with the true conclusion. So I could have an argument that claims Obama was a president of the United States. Christopher Newport is a Virginia State University. Therefore, Silverman is a logic professor. All of the claims are true, but that is not a good argument. It is not a sound argument because the truth of the premises has nothing to do with the truth of the conclusion. Whoever is skeptical is not faithful. What this is a universal negative statement because we have the negationist here and a generalized claim about the skeptical and the faithful. Therefore, the proper translation is no S is F. By the way, if there are questions, please interrupt me. It's very important. Please raise your hand and then we can discuss. It's very important that if you got these wrong, you understand why you got them wrong. Kenny is not one of those that will survive this episode of South Park. Again, this was right off the review. Kenny, one specific guy, lowercase k. The group of people who will survive this episode of South Park, capital S. Little k is not capital S, is the proper translation. A person isn't moral unless she is honest. Now, this was one of the tricky patterns, which I drew your attention to when we were memorizing patterns. The negation unless pattern is a universal affirmative claim because they essentially cancel each other out. So this is an all moral people are honest claim because the isn't and the unless functionally cancel each other out. It isn't true that no logic assignments are fun. What is tricky here, again, this is one of the patterns I drew your attention to. It is the negation of a universal negative. And these sorts of patterns are tricky because the negation of a universal negative isn't a universal positive, but instead, so if we're saying that if we're rejecting the claim that no logic assignments are fun, it doesn't mean all logic assignments are fun. It just means at least one logic assignment is fun, which is some L is F. And again, these are all in section, I think, 2.2 or 2.3. That's a pattern right in one of those bold bricks of patterns to memorize. People who are bold are polite is a way of saying all bold people are polite. That's easy enough. Question 11, all unproven beliefs ought to be rejected is an unproven belief. I believe this was one right off of one of the exercises. What this question is testing is whether you remember the rules we gave you for what to do when you see a claim in quotations. And when you see a claim in quotations, we are not talking about, we don't translate the things in the quotations. We translate what we're referring to as the specific thing in the quotes. So we're discussing one specific thing, the claim that all unproven beliefs ought to be rejected. Since we're referring to a thing in quotes, it is a specific lowercase. So lowercase u or lowercase b is how I would have translated that. Is an unproven belief, is capital B. The world's best cook lives in Detroit. World's best cook, because we're talking about best, it's one specific person, lowercase c. The group of people who live in Detroit is the second category, so we need a capital D for that. Remember, you have to translate the lives in somewhere. You can't just jump to Detroit and grab onto to Detroit. And I believe this one also is one of the homework exercises. No one is wise unless they graduate from CNU. This is one of the more confusing patterns because it is a no one unless, and it translates as an all because the no one and the unless essentially cancel each other out. So all W is capital G. All capital W is capital G. All right, those are translations. All right, valid conclusions. Find the valid conclusions. Kant was a German. Kant was a philosopher. Find the conclusion. This one's nice and intuitive. The conclusion is, therefore, some Germans are philosophers. Translate, little k is capital G. Little k is capital P. We do a mini star test, which requires us to do nothing. It's potentially valid. We figure out what belongs in the conclusion. We're going to need a capital G and a capital P. We try to remember what to do when we have two capital letters. Well, if we have two capital letters, first we look to see if we have all universal statements, all alls and nos. We do not. Therefore, we use a sum statement. Now, if we had a negation somewhere, we'd use a sum is not statement, but we don't have any negations. So sum G is P is correct. Oh, we do the star test again, and it's valid. Also, I did not give this to you as an option in the multiple choice, but sum P is G would also be an acceptable translation of this, and that also would have been valid.
So is there a difference between not having a valid conclusion and not being able to say conclusion at all?
Well, the difference is this. You can always slap a conclusion onto premises, but that isn't very helpful if it's a ridiculous conclusion that doesn't follow from the premises. So there's a difference. I mean, you can always add a conclusion, but what we're looking for here is a valid conclusion. And many times there is no valid, many times there are arguments that there are premises that no valid conclusion comes from. And here's an example of that. All virtuous Americans are tall. Joan is tall. All right. All V is T. And lowercase j, Joan, is capital T. Then we do the mini star test. And then we immediately write the word invalid. No valid conclusion possible. Why? Because no matter what we do with the conclusion, that T is never going to have a star on it. So this is going to fail the star test no matter what happens in the conclusion. So sure, we could slap an invalid conclusion on here using a capital V and a lowercase j, but it's, that's not really very helpful. All right, number 16. Some charming people are mean. No one who picks his nose is charming. Some C is M. No N is C. Do a quick star test. It's potentially valid. Figure out what goes in the conclusion. We're going to need an M and an N in the conclusion. Figure out the form of the conclusion. We're going to need a sum. And because we have a negation, we're going to need an is not. We distribute the N in the conclusion, star the M, and that is valid. Now, if you guessed wrong the first time and you put N first and then an M, that would have been invalid, and then you would have had to do the extra step by trying again by swapping the positions, and then you would have gotten a valid conclusion. Number 17. Some snakes are poisonous animals. Only poisonous animals are dangerous creatures. Some S is P. Some capital S is capital P. Only poisonous animals are dangerous creatures. Remember, only is one of those trick words. It is an all statement that introduces the second term. So all P with the second term is D. All D is P. And then we do the mini star test and we realize no valid conclusion will be possible because we've got two P's but no star. Arthur is king of all the Britons. The king of all the Britons does not manage an autonomous collective. Only those who manage autonomous collectives are just rulers. We may conclude that Arthur is not a just ruler. This was right off the review. It was valid. I don't feel like translating it again. Does anybody really need me to translate that again? Probably not. Sensible Judeans are happy, since sensible Judeans always look on the bright side of life, and since all who are happy look on the bright side of life. The biggest challenge here was realizing that the conclusion is what you were given first. The since after the first clause is a premise indicator. So these, the second and third clauses are premises. The first clause is the conclusion. And this one will turn out to be invalid. The bright side of life term never gets distributed. Ducks must be witches because witches float and also ducks float. Again, we have the conclusion first. We know this because the because indicates that the second half of the second parts of the sentences are clauses. Ducks must be witches is the conclusion. And things that float never get distributed. Therefore, this one will be invalid. 21, no friendly cannibals are mediocre. People who are dull are sometimes mediocre. Thus, not everyone who is dull is a friendly cannibal. All right, I think I should translate this one. Not everyone is a some is not pattern. D, some D is not F. No friendly cannibals are mediocre. No, F is M. All D, okay, or rather it's some D is M. Because they threw that sometimes, all people who are dull are sometimes mediocre, so that's a sum. Then we translate, or rather we distribute, we star, and it's valid because we get stars on the F, M, and D, and exactly one on the right. I think the hardest part of that one was just getting the proper translation of the conclusion. One or more bachelors at CNU must be scholarly. The evidence for this is whoever's a bachelor at CNU is cheap, and that some who are cheap are scholarly. All right. Again, we have the conclusion given to us in the first clause. One or more bachelors at CNU must be scholarly. Some B is S. Some capital B is capital S. The evidence for this is a premise indicator. Whoever is a bachelor at CNU is cheap. All B is C. All capital B is capital C. Some who are cheap are scholarly. Some C is S. And that's going to be invalid because we've got no stars on the C and 2 on the B. We may conclude that not all who are notorious are criminals, since criminals are weak, and those who are weak aren't dishonest, and at least some who are dishonest are notorious. All right, again, we are given the conclusion first. Not all who are notorious are criminals. So some notorious are not criminals. Some N is not C. Criminals are weak. All C is W. All who are, oh, okay. Those who are weak aren't dishonest is a negation, so universal negative no. No W is D. At least some who are dishonest are notorious. Some D is N. All right, then we distribute. Oh, wait. Almost did that wrong. Distribute the C, the W, the D. We star those in the premises. Distribute the C in the conclusion, star the N in the conclusion. And it's valid because we have stars on the C, the W, the N, and the D. Exactly one on the right. It's good. All right, Martin Luther King, at least some who believe in objective moral truth aren't absolutizing the moral beliefs of their own culture. We know this because Martin Luther King believed in objective moral truth, but disagreed with the moral beliefs of his culture, and because no one who disagrees with the moral beliefs of their own culture are absolutizing the moral beliefs of that culture. Okay, we need to see that the conclusion is given first. The way we recognize that is actually because we have premise indicators after, on all the clauses after that. At least some who believe in objective moral truths aren't absolutizing the moral beliefs of their own culture. So the conclusion is some A, or rather some, all right, some B is not A. Some believers in objective moral truths are not absolutizing the moral beliefs of the culture. Martin Luther King believed in objective moral truths. Little m is capital B. Martin Luther King disagreed with the moral beliefs of his culture. Little m is capital D. And no one who disagrees with the moral beliefs of their own culture is absolutizing the beliefs of that culture. No D is A. No capital D is A. We distribute, we star the undistributed in the conclusion, and it's valid. We have stars on the D, the A, and the B, one on the right. It's good. And finally, one right out of the exercises that we discussed, the Spanish one about what's good for breakfast. All scrambled eggs are good for breakfast. And it doesn't matter that you can't read the Spanish. All you have to do is read the English. All huevos revueltos are buenos para desayuno. All café con leche is bueno para desayuno. Therefore, all huevos revueltos is café con leche. Therefore, we've proven that scrambled eggs are coffee. We distribute, we star, and we realize we never got a star on the B, and we got 2 stars on the C, and that eggs are not coffee. Questions? All right, look. You know, I know some people are disappointed with their grades. I've already told you that there is a lifeline. The lifeline is that I will raise your grade on exam 1 to your grade on the final if you do better on the final. That being said, if you bomb exam 2 as well as exam 1, I encourage you to withdraw at that point. Because I've taught this class enough times, people generally get no higher than their average grade from exam 1 and exam 2 in this class. So we'll talk about that after exam 2. In the meantime, look, if you did well on exam 1, good job. Keep up the good work. Keep doing what you're doing. If you did not like your grade on exam 1, you have to change something. And you know, the easiest thing to do is to sign up for tutoring, but also change the way you're taking notes in class, change the way that you are writing down feedback during the exercises when we go over them together, change the way you are studying, do more Logicola. You know, send me an email and we can talk during office hours. But look, one of the most important skills in life is to recognize when something didn't work and to make an adjustment. So adjust accordingly. Believe it or not, I'm on your team. I'm here as a resource for you. I want you to succeed. All right. And without further ado, let's turn the page and move on to something more fun. All right, give me a second to set this up. All right, we're going to go over section 3.2, or at least start to go over section 3.2. We're getting there. All right, this is going to be session number 983355. That's 983355. 983355. All right, we're going to talk about section 3.2. This is about what is called definitions. And we're going to focus on lexical definitions. Here's something that's important to realize. Getting your starting definitions correct are a huge part of virtually every important issue. So what we're going to start with is understanding sort of proper use and some skills for proper use of what are called lexical definitions. Lexical definitions track current, normal, everyday use of words. Now, these are different from what are called stipulative definitions. Stipulative definitions are also important, but stipulative definitions are artificial. Stipulative definitions are when we say we're going to use a word in a somewhat unusual way. So the most common important usage of stipulative definitions is in like experiments, because lots of important words don't have operational definitions. And in an experiment, you have to stipulate something. So let's say I wanted to track the number of cold days at Christopher Newport University, and that's going to be part of my experiment. Well, to do that, there's something weird about the word cold. There's something weird about the word cold. There is no objective set definition for at what point it becomes cold. So I would have to stipulate one if I want that to be part of my experiment. I would either have to say, any day it is under 39 degrees at noon, or any day the majority of CNU students are wearing a heavy coat, or something like that would have to be my definition of the word cold. And that's not the normal way we use the word. In the same way, many of the logic words like argument, words like sound, invalid, valid, many of those words are not used the way that they are normally used. We stipulate them for our artificial language of logic. All right, in when we are trying to define terms, when we're trying to find a definition, the most important thing is that you are able to interchange your definition for all uses and only uses of the original term. So one of the classic examples goes back to Immanuel Kant, the word bachelor. It means unmarried man. So all uses of the word bachelor can be replaced by the expression unmarried man. All bachelors are unmarried men. All unmarried men are bachelors. However, there are traditional stereotypes about bachelors. One of them is that they are not very tidy, that they keep their houses messy. But bachelor does not mean messy man or unmarried messy man. Even if that is true, that they tend to be messy, that does not become part of the definition. So you need to be able to substitute all instances, the definition you're proposing for all instances of the original word. All right, so 5 rules for definitions. The most important one is that your lexical definitions must not be too broad or too narrow. We do not want your definition to include things excluded for the original concept or exclude things included in the original concept. So football players does not equal ball players because the category of ball players is too broad. So this is ball players, this is football players. And there are other things. There are basketball players. There are baseball players, and so forth. So football players is just a smaller subset of ball players. And therefore, defining football players as ball players is incorrect because there's lots of things that count as ball players that do not count as football players. And you can have, so this is too broad. Because the definition ball players for football players is too broad of a definition. It includes too many things. Football players also does not equal quarterbacks. Why? Well, it's the reverse problem. Quarterbacks are one subset of football players, but there are also defensive players, kickers, offensive linemen, and so forth. So if you try to define football players as just quarterbacks, your definition will be too narrow. In other words, the term quarterbacks excludes things that do in fact belong in the first term. So that definition is too narrow. It excludes things that need to be included. All right. All right, rule 2. We want to avoid circularity or poorly understood terms. Circularity is where we have not defined our term effectively because we've only restated either some of the core words or the root word of the term being defined. So if I define professor as one who professes, and if I don't know what it means to profess, then I haven't helped you define the word very much. If I tell you, if you don't know what a firefighter is, and I say a firefighter is someone whose job is to fight fires, well, again, that doesn't help. We need to use different words to explain concepts. You can't just recycle parts of the same word. So I was once writing a paper where I had to look up a theology word, the word atonement, and I picked up the theological dictionary and it said atonement is that thing that atones. And I threw the book across the room and said, this is worthless. Because if I didn't know what atonement was before, saying atonement is the stuff that atones doesn't help. That's why circular definitions stink. They're no good. Poorly understood terms, something like saying knowledge is the product of epistemic success. Well, you probably don't know what epistemic success is. If you're trying to understand what knowledge is, throwing around terms like epistemic success makes you more confused, not less. So that doesn't help. We don't want to use poorly understood terms. We want to match the vagueness or precision of the original term. So there is a view of aesthetics of beauty that beautiful means symmetrical, but that's not a good lexical definition. Why? Because that's not how we use the term. Symmetrical is something quantifiable and measurable. Beauty, at least the way we use the term in our culture, is generally thought not to be reducible to measurements and symmetry. Beauty is vaguer. Rule 4 connects our conversation today to the conversation on Wednesday. We want terms that match the tone of our terms. We want definitions to match the tone of the original term. So we want to match neutral words with neutral words, positive words with positive words, and negative words with negative words. So we should not define soldiers as terrorists because one is a neutral term and one is a negative term. In the same way, you don't want to define either of these as freedom fighters, which is a positive term. You need to match the tone. And finally, rule 5, we only want to include essential properties in the definition of a term. We don't want to add extra non-essential properties that aren't part of the definition. So a bachelor can't be defined as an unmarried messy man because the messiness is not essential to what it means to be a bachelor. And that mistake results in a definition that is too narrow. All right, let's try a few of these. This is where we see. What is the most serious problem with defining lie as false statement? So we're trying to get a definition for the word lie. We're going to suggest false statement. I'm going to say that there's at least one thing wrong with that. What is the most serious thing wrong with defining lie as false statement? Oh, good for you. Yes. So not all false statements are lies, right? Can somebody give me an example of a false statement that's not a lie? Well, so what makes it a false statement but not a lie? All right. So what? All right. Well, that's probably not the best example. Maybe you can help us out. Good. So what makes the claim a lie versus a false statement is whether or not you believe it. So if you say bananas are red and believe it, it's false, but it's not a lie. If you say bananas are red and you know that they're not, then it's a lie. So there are lots of mistakes that aren't lies. So for example, any problem that you got wrong on the exam, presumably you thought you were marking the right answer, or at least you were attempting to mark the right answer. You're not a liar because you got one wrong. You just made a mistake. It's false, but it's not a lie. Lying is about deception. Same thing with sort of predictions. If the weatherman says it's going to snow today and it doesn't, was the weatherman lying? Well, probably not. He probably was trying to predict it correctly and he just got it wrong. So false statement is a much bigger category than lie. I wouldn't say false statements are vague. We know what false statement means, and we generally know what lies are. All right, good. All right, how about adolescent? How about defining adolescent as a person between the ages of 9 and 19? Too broad, too narrow, too vague, wrong tone, circular. Yeah. What is an example of an adolescent who is not a person between 9 and 19? Because you're saying it's too narrow. So you're saying that the definition is discluding people who actually are adolescents, but who are not people between 9 and 19. What would it be an example of something like that? Okay, so some people get adolescence just a little early. They get their growth spurt a little early, and there are 8-year-old adolescents. And there are people who, don't really finish maturing at 19 and, are still adolescents, past 20, either emotionally or generally physically by about 19 or 20 that stops. But yeah, so this is too narrow of a category. How about this one? God is your object of ultimate concern. What's wrong with defining God as the object of ultimate concern? I would say that the expression object of ultimate concern is just pretty vague. That's probably the best answer. It's definitely not circular. We didn't say God, whatever is your God. We'd have to reuse the word God on both sides for it to be circular. So it's not circular, but it's too vague. And part of what makes it too vague is it's kind of both too broad and too narrow. So you've got things that are people's object of ultimate concern that aren't that supernatural guy that we talk about when we talk about God. We're not. So somebody, their object of ultimate concern might be Star Wars. And that's not what people mean by God. Yeah, so Yeah, the term's just too vague in several ways. All right, we will continue this conversation on Monday. Also, you should do the next set of reading and exercises for Monday. Have a good weekend. Have a happy Valentine's Day. Have a happy President's Day. And be COVID safe. Take care. Good luck.